train length limits and speed limits and quality control. Now, I want to point out something. This is from the perspective of the United States. The United States does not, in essence, have laws as the basis for running things. If you're not aware of this, less regulation is good, is agreed upon by a little over half of the population, or a mind-bendingly large amount of it. Not because it's a good idea, but because of the inevitable. Corruption happens where people have power. Taking power away from people, or limiting it, or making them be punished horribly for abusing it, are the only methods for preventing abuse of power. The United States, by definition, will not punish people who abuse their position of power because they're in a position of power and can make sure that they can't get punished. This is the status quo everywhere on earth. So you might understand the American penchant for refusing to have any rules in place. We'd rather get in a fist fight in the street and be able to walk away without any repercussions if neither of us file charges than have peace and happiness. Because inevitably, we believe, because we've seen it too much, corruption will happen. If you are a Russian, you know this will happen. If you have lived around anybody with the last name Pinochet at any time, you know this will happen. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Tiny amounts of power corrupt obnoxiously. All right? But let's get on with it. Australian Billiton BHP iron ores freight train, 4.6 miles in length. Does it go over any crossings or go through an area that's populated? This is Australia we're talking about. Brazil, mineral transport category trains can be up to 2 miles. Now, if you're not aware of it, respectively, we have 10,000 feet or more in that last case. In the previous one in Australia, it's 24,000 feet long or more. European trains are limited to under half a mile, around 2,400 feet. Some of the sidings on the network only have a maximum length of 0.28 miles, or 1,400 feet, maybe 1,500 feet. So the train lengths are based on what they can do with their infrastructure. Australia, Brazil, and the United States have infrastructure for trains that were built up in bursts to be, in some cases, so long that there aren't enough trains to fill the entire length of track, and it's an uninterrupted section. It's not even hard to load the damn thing. Technically, you could, well, I'm not sure about that, but that's a report from the year 2002. There are enough trains in the United States, probably right now, cars, that you could probably fill up all of them, I guess, on one of them. But the point is, we have ridiculously long sections of track. Notoriously, the United States has a section of track, if you want to call it a section, it's actually multiple, that if you flip all the switches, you can put a train from one coastline to another as one continuous train. How many engines does it take? If you're not aware of it, if you get a full-scale, hardcore power plant engine, think Razor Train from the video game Half-Life 2. Or is it 1? I keep forgetting. You could end up with high-powered trains, 2 of them pulling a 2-mile section. Basically, 1 train per mile if you're willing to do it a certain way. Why? Let me get on with the rest of the data. Freight train engines and all components are required to have a massive overage of how durable and stable they are. They have to be able to operate in a stable manner with an average load, whatever that is, for that car type, at 70 to 75 miles an hour in many cases, not all of them. People think, well, freight trains should be slower, or maybe they should be faster. The normally loaded train will go around 40 to 50 miles an hour so that they're within a major range of error, a major safety margin. The average freight train speed actually is 20 to 30 miles an hour. That's the average. Nationally, freight trains go 30 or 20 miles an hour. They're slow poking along. Union Pacific train averaged a speed of 25 miles an hour total by just measuring how long it took to move every hunk of train equipment and parts over full distance. That's the real average rate. If they stuck to 30 miles an hour and never went above it and always maintained that speed somehow, they would get the same averages. But they're going up and down hills, even though they're very slight. They're having to stop sometimes. They have to unload and reload. This isn't a continuous rotating conveyor belt, although people have conceived of doing that. Yes, they have. We'll get to that some other time. Slow zones, heavy payloads, or really long trains being driven by said 1 or 2 engines only, drive it down to 5 to 10 miles an hour, maybe 35 miles an hour. There's a huge dynamic range from 5 miles an hour to 75, but guess what else happens? 49 CFR 213.247B limits trains to a maximum speed at crossings that you're sitting at of 110 miles an hour. It's based on whether or not you can do it without incident more than a certain statistical average, meaning you can't have too many derailments. But again, they're designed to go reliably under average load at 70 to 75 miles an hour. If they have a heavier load, it may be lower depending on the car type, and it may be higher. So what they do is they find out what the car type limits are, put them at exactly the limit for the speed they need to be able to achieve, and then dial it back literally 75% of whatever they were running, so they're running slower than maximum speed. And depending on fuel mileage and economy, it's not green. They're not trying to save the whales. To save money, they'll run it even slower than the average. And in those cases, it's to their advantage to overload them up to the upper limit for any section that's train track that may be weak or considered low grade, and drop it down 10% from that, not going up to the limit, but below it, and ride it at the optimal speed for the highest stability and the highest economy. While it is about money, the length of the train is also about using the least amount of fuel and having the least number of derailments, because derailments are pornographically expensive. The amount of expense they lose for every train derailment negates almost all the savings they can make for an entire fucking year. Compound that by having 3 or 4 of them in 1 month, you get the idea. And it's the train company that worries about it. Per company, per corporation, or per division, they're worried about not having train derailments for a completely unrelated reason almost as much as we are. And again, they order these things based on the least statistical likelihood of a tip over, which is what a train derailment is, or a spreading of the track. Federal regulations do not specify highway grade crossing and track inspection frequency. It's state and local. Stop yelling at the federal government. Why was this deregulated? Was it ever regulated on a federal level that they should do these things? You have to look this up. On U.S. tracks without block signal systems, passenger trains are limited to 60 and freight trains are limited to 50. If they have block signal systems, not as much. They can go faster. $130,000 public at-grade crossings from 2005 to 2022. Of them, 50% have automatic warning systems. Full automatic warning systems. 35% have flashing lights and gates that are reactive to the train going by. 15% have only flashing lights. Private at-grade highway grade crossings, most don't have any signals at all, and there are 80,000 of them. But these are done on sections of ground where the majority of us won't go. That's why. What limits the length of a train? In the United States, it was found that air brake technology, which is all over the planet, it's the same air brakes everywhere, limit U.S. freight trains to around 12,000 feet or 2.25 miles approximately on Class 1 railroads. You're going to have to look up that. Legislation defines a long train as 7,500 feet long. It won't restrict it to only 7,500 feet, as that would increase fuel consumption by 13% and therefore costs of transport. This is based on 2019 data, but it's pretty much average. They dropped from 130,000 crossings in 2008 to 129,000, blah, blah, blah. The averages are still the same. So what we're dealing with here is economy of scale. The idea is expending efficiency as much as possible and lowering the cost, and again, tuning, if they have the time and the computer programs for it, to track every car, tuning them to where all of them have approximately the same physics engine running on them. If any of you have done video game engine activity, the physics components of dealing with automated physics systems, where you get a glitchy firearm that's flying around in circles because it's lost its physics math and requirements. When you're dealing with trains, balancing the load balancing across them, so they act like a mechanical version of a transmission line of data, means that you can get away with fine-tuning things to where you have complete control over the train. And every train company strives for this, unless they lack the technology, have a shitty track record, aren't bothering to do it, or they're pressed for time. A little lead-up time, but not too much, to get everything balanced as much as possible. Let's continue. 0.1% of trains were 14,000 feet or longer, 2.65 miles long. But those are special purpose or whatever. From one port area to another, they're very, very minimum. Less than 1% are longer than 10,000 feet. 10% were longer than 9,800 feet. 50% were around or a little over 5,400 feet. 50% were under 5,400 feet. The median length, based on that, is around a mile long. And that's literally all of it I could dig up because of one person asking me a question. How long do they get? The average, or median, is actually about a mile. But they can go up to 2.25 to 2.5 miles long, and they're not restricted by anything. If you can succeed in stopping them in a reasonable period of time and or have a statistically small occurrence of tip over, aka derailment. Derailment and tip over aren't the same thing. And if your local and state laws are regulating the rails, but it's still the responsibility of the companies that are all over the country. In a country where we rarely want to regulate things, even when it kills us. See also every other subject that's in the news. There were people who objected to drunk driving laws and seat belts and airbags and having crossing lights, saying it thinned out the population to get people killed once in a while. And still say this. Anything that restricts anything, by definition, on principle, you're going to find people objecting to all over the world. In the United States, even more so. And again, I'm going to repeat this. It's not based on the idea that somebody with an AR-15 is going to fight some corrupt government. That's bullshit. If you believe that kind of stuff, if you're really that kind of person, you're a nitwit. But we are aware in this country of our own. I mean, if I ran this planet, first of all, you would not have anybody telling a lie on the internet anymore, which means nobody could do alternate reality games. I couldn't even enjoy the shit I like on YouTube for the Backrooms trilogies, or whatever you want to call them. They're actually not trilogies, but you get the idea. You wouldn't be, Huggy Wuggy wouldn't exist if I was running things, because by definition, it's not a factual statement. If I was being extremely strict and turned into a complete jerk, that's not really what I would do. But let's say I turned into my worst self. What is your worst self? Okay, now imagine being paid as a bureaucrat to be your worst self every fucking day. Okay, next. How often do we have a train disaster in the United States, really? We're pulling trains, no jokes, we're pulling trains in this country that are, bordering on world record length. The only one that's the longest one is in Australia, and that one's 4.6 miles. But that's literally a single train running once a day or something like that, or some other crazy amount of length to it. Might just be a complete circuit where they're just rolling through and emptying train cars because it's faster than running a conveyor belt 500 miles long or something. The point I'm making here is we've been getting away with this shit for decades, 80 years or more. Yeah, trains have been able to go to 100 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour for a very long time because cars have. If a car can do it, so can a train. That's actually one of the mottos that you hear people say. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. I hope this was informative. Please look up all the links because I can't cover all of it.